comfortable where you are, but it's great that you can join us remotely. So let me first introduce myself. My name is Sophie Lambin. I'm the CEO of Kite Insights, a research, capacity building, and strategic engagement agency on social and environmental issues, and I will be moderating this discussion. We have had the privilege to work with Saint-Gobain for the past couple of years on their net zero positioning, but we also curated that event series since last September. Some of you participated in convening the built environment sector leaders to explore how to decarbonize, how to do so at speed and at scale, and importantly, how to collaborate with every stakeholder that matters across what is a very fragmented value chain. When I was preparing this session with Claire, she was saying how striking it is, the extent to which collaboration is at the center of all this conversation, as every industry leader realizes the kind of collaboration that net zero transformation calls for. So that will certainly be a core part of our discussion. Our session today is really focusing on rallying as a built environment value chain around that common purpose, which is to reach net zero. And the key question we're putting to you is how can industry leaders raise their ambition and bring regulators and investors along their net zero transformation journey? To explore that question, I'm delighted to have some esteemed speakers with us, starting with Pierre-André de Chalandard, Chairman of Saint-Gobain, who is joining us remotely. Diane Hoskins, co-CEO of Gensler. Diane, you maybe wave, here we go. Sonal Jain from the COP26 champion, Built Environment and Infrastructure. And Sonal is, despite being extremely busy with her big day tomorrow, is with us today. So thank you very much, Sonal. Peter Oosterveer, CEO of Arcadis. Sheila Patel, who is just joining us as we speak. Sheila is the founder and director of Society for Promotion of Area Resource Centers, or SPARC. Hello, Sheila, welcome. And Sheila joined us previously in one of our net zero sessions, and she was wonderful. To my left, I have Claire Pedini, Senior Vice President for Human Resources and Corporate Social Responsibility. And then last but not least, Lars Volkel, Executive Vice President, Wood Product Division of Stora Enso. Wonderful. So please know that this session will be recorded. We are planning to make an edited version of it afterwards, and with the aim of sharing it more widely. If you are saying anything that is off the record, please let us know and we'll make sure to exclude that from our recording. I would like now to turn to Pierre-André de Chalandard and invite you, Pierre-André, to share a few welcoming remarks.
Well, thank you, Sophie, and good afternoon or to all of you. Sonal, Diane, Peter, Sheila, Claire, and the one I have, and maybe I have forgotten someone. I'm not sure, but I think I have seen everybody. I'm very happy and honored to welcome you today on to close this series of workshops that we have organized in the run-up to COP26 on the themes, as you said, Sophie, towards net zero, rallying around a common purpose across the built environment value chain. I must apologize not being with you. Unfortunately, I had a small surgery yesterday, which prevented me to take the flight towards Glasgow. But I am, we have been now familiar to this kind of hybrid meetings, which work. All of us today, we know that the construction sector is a key contributor if we want to be serious about fighting climate change. The figures are impressive. It's at a world level, there are various ways to account, but globally it's close to 40% of the global CO2 emissions. We consume 50% of the world natural resources, and at the same time, the third figure I want to share is that the numbers are growing by the day, and they have to be meaningful. That 120 countries and 70% of the worldwide GDP is committed to carbon neutrality targets, which means that we will not achieve that if there is not a major move from the construction sector. There will not be a significant decarbonization of the economy without us being involved. So for all our companies, it's huge opportunities investing us because we are tasked and we have the power to continue to grow if we are giving a contribution, and we have a possibility and we have a responsibility to have a positive impact on the people and the planet. I have been an early speaker on those topics, and I remember very well these days, I was quite active in COP21 in 2015 in Paris, where I think that's a time where it was widely recognized that the corporate world is as much a solution than the problem, and it will not work without the very strong involvement of the corporate sector. We are not the enemies of the climate, and I think it starts to be well understood. I've always had this conviction, and I think that most people would agree, which means that we have also a duty to act very strongly, and we have to be on the right side of history, as Liz Kingo said. If we want to do that, I think there are two important conditions. The first one is to move all together, united ourselves, and that was a very important topic on the events we have had in the run-up to this COP26. The whole value chain, which is very fragmented in the construction industry, has to work together on this objective. And the second is that we have to work, and it is, in my view today, probably more difficult. We have to move forward united with governments, because we cannot replace them, but we need them, and we need to fight with them. I believe that governments will move. The more they will move, the more we are ambitious, the more they will move. So we have a duty and a responsibility to make governments move on this topic, to improve their plans and their pledges. And we are at the heart of that at the moment. And on the other hand, the corporate world deeply needs governments to act. We know that in the corporate world, there is one single thing we need, and it's going to take time. I know it's to have a price for carbon, but clearly we need very strong signal for the government, because we have to invest on the long term, and we need good signals, especially on the energy mix, which is going to be in place, and that will move from the government. So, the essence of what I want to share with you is that we need to move all together forward. That's what we are here today. That was a clear message from the previous discussion. I think we are going to have the opportunity to share our findings, and maybe at the end of this meeting to study what are the next steps. Saint-Gobain is definitely committed to continue to act alongside all participants in the value chain on this topic, and we need to continue to act together. That's what I wanted to share with you to open this discussion, which I am sure is going to be very fruitful.
Thank you very much, Pierre-André. And indeed, you have been an early adopter of that kind of narrative at the time of COP21 in Paris with the book you published at the time. So thank you for your leadership. I would like now to ask everyone in the room to very briefly introduce themselves, those who are not speakers, and I will pass hygienic mic to each of you so that you can pass it on.
Hello, this is Cristina Gamboa. I am the CEO of the World Green Building Council.
Hi, Cristina. Great to have you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nigel Tonks, a director at Arup and part of the Climate Champions team for the built environment.
Hello, everybody. I'm Roland Honziker. I'm the Director for Sustainable Buildings and Cities at the WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development.
Okay. You don't hear it. Okay, I'll speak a bit louder. My name is Ingrid Reumert, and I'm from the Velux Group, and I'm heading External Relations and Sustainability.
So Emmanuel Normand, Vice President Sustainable Development at Saint-Gobain.
Julie Hiwagoyen, Chief Executive at the UK Green Building Council.
Matthew Reddy, Senior Private Sector Specialist with the Jeff.
I'm Diego Ribó. I'm the Sustainability Director of the Municipality of Vitacura of Santiago de Chile.
I'm Esther M from Singapore, and well, crazy about green building and net zero.
Hi, I'm Renee Kizar from Johnson Controls. I'm the Vice President, Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs.
Hi, I'm Alexis Haas. I hope I'm projecting enough. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Arcadis.
Hello, I'm Scott Foster. I'm Director of Sustainable Energy at the UN in Geneva.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. I'm now going to turn to you, Sonal. If you could tell us a little bit about the work you've done with the Climate Champions, and maybe tell a bit everyone about who the Climate Champions are, and from your point of view, what are your aspiration and expected outcome for what's going to happen tomorrow?
Good afternoon, everyone. Really, thank you for inviting me, first of all, and Saint-Gobain for hosting. No, I'm happy to project.
But I think it's used for the Zoom.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to project.
Yeah,
yes.
You don't rely on the mic to project.
Okay. There you go. So thank you for inviting me to the roundtable, and thank you to Saint-Gobain for hosting this roundtable. I actually, it's really a privilege to join leaders from across the built environment value chain to discuss how do we act together. So, I mean, obviously, I'll start with Climate Champions team and their mandate, and just reflecting on the topic of discussion today, which is raising ambition, rallying around a common purpose. This is really at the heart of Climate Champions mandate. Nigel Topping, Gonzalo Munoz, the two high-level UN climate champions, have been appointed by COP presidency essentially to really champion this agenda, the goals of Paris Agreement amongst the non-state actor community, and which includes businesses, includes cities, regions, investors, universities, everyone. So, and the two campaigns that they have launched, which is Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, have been instrumental in really mobilizing this climate leadership between the business community. I mean, figures as of October are over 6,000 actors from across the globe are committed to Race to Zero. And that includes a substantial number of businesses across the built environment value chain. Now, underneath the Climate Champions team, there is a vast network of leading industry organizations, professionals, and frontrunner businesses who have been extremely vital in delivering on this mandate in their respective sectors, bringing that manpower, bringing the expertise, bringing the connection. So on that note, we have been extremely fortunate to have a solid group within our built environment sector. We have World Green Building Council. We have World WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have Global ABC, Global Alliance for Building and Construction, C40s, and Resilience Shift. All these organizations have come together to form a leading built environment coalition to collectively support on driving this mandate, driving the transformation of built environment sector, supporting the Climate Champions team, and supporting BASE and COP unit on delivering this outcomes, which I'll shortly cover. And obviously on that note, delighted that this side of the room is all the people that we have all been working together, and Nigel also, who has been our senior advisor to the Built Environment Climate Champions team. So just on that note, everything I say is collective outcomes of this group. So I think Sophie, to your question about what are the outcomes and aspirations of the sector that we have been as a coalition working towards. To simplify, we early on in the process, we distilled the various things that we need to achieve into 4 key work streams. I'll go with them one by one. The first was establishing built environment as a critical sector for climate solution. Now, Pierre really mentioned about the vast impact of our sector on the environment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the raw material use, and sheer projected growth rate in our sector, which is set to double by 2060. It is clear our sector is a critical enabler to the transition of our economy to net zero carbon, and it must be recognized as such. So this really has been the core starting focus point for us. And the day tomorrow, the dedicated day on cities, regions, and built environment has really provided that great impetus to build that narrative, to create the noise and land some of the core outcomes tomorrow. Obviously, tomorrow is not the end of it. It's in many ways the start of it. And in this process, we've really seen progress. Just looking at NDCs, 136 countries have mentioned buildings in their NDCs. This is up from 88 back in 2015. And further, you look at what's in the text. Buildings is the second most cited area in NDCs after renewables. So it is definitely being recognized in terms of as a critical climate solution. Now that's mitigation, obviously. On adaptation, just the numbers are equally staggering. The figures are somewhere in the order of 1.6 billion people, urban dwellers, are at an extreme risk of high heat waves and temperature shocks. 800 million people are extremely vulnerable to coastal flooding and sea level rises. So that really places the importance of building resilience at par with mitigation. And this is where obviously our sector has an opportunity to lead on Race to Zero, but also lead on Race to Resilience. I mean, on Progress, it's a much newer campaign, so it hasn't kind of got the same level of traction in the business community as Race to Zero, but absolutely this would be my ask, that they should need the same focus we have all given to Race to Zero. Now coming to second outcome for the coalition, which has been one voice, one ambition. Now, understanding what 1.5 degrees mean for our sector, translating that into clear goals and near-term and long-term outcomes for our sector has been of utmost importance. The vision that has been set in the Marrakesh Partnership Climate Action Pathway clearly lays out what we need to achieve collectively by 2030 and by 2050. It's widely endorsed. We just need to ensure everyone now aligns to that common goal. The vision, I'll just say it out loud, is by 2030, 100% of new buildings must be net zero carbon in operation, with significant reduction in embodied carbon and widespread retrofit of existing stock underway, all culminating into reducing the emissions from sector by half by 2030, and by 2050, at the latest, the entire emissions from built environment value chain to be net zero, including operational and embodied, which is really important. In our engagement through the globe, one thing that came out quite strongly is even that understanding of no, we must tackle embodied emissions along with operational, and the sheer impact of it, what it needs to drive that change in supply chain, has been really an area which we need to push further. So actually on that note, really pleased with World Green Building Council's updated commitment now, which echoes this commitment and really provides front-runner businesses to go and act and progress this outcome, including embodied and operational. Coming to the third outcome, which is all engaged and all committed. Now, we have all, I think Pierre couldn't be more clear about this. We have to raise our level of ambition first before we call on states to do the same. And that's the classic theory of ambition loop. And through Race to Zero campaign, we've really seen a groundswell of momentum within the sector to get behind the Race to Zero. And our sector is not easy. I myself have had 5 roles. I worked as an architect, engineer. I worked as a consultant. Now I work with a property developer, and you name it, there are property companies, there are manufacturers. So just covering each of the actors of value chain, ensuring they are all behind this Race to Zero goal has been an extremely rewarding and successful outcome for us. To share some of the numbers, as of October, we've now got $1.2 trillion of asset under management, real estate asset under management committed to Race to Zero globally. We have got over 20% of largest architectural and engineering firms globally fully committed to Race to Zero. Construction, I mean, I have worked with contractors, a messy sector, fragmented, tight margins. The numbers within large construction companies have really doubled in the last 2 months, and not even large. We have had over 100 construction SMEs join from 10 countries, join Race to Zero. So this is like really critical mass committed behind the movement. And on top of that, when you look at cities, over 1,000 cities committed to Race to Zero, within their commitment, strong focus on driving down emissions from buildings and construction. This is all kind of coming together as a really core loud voice we want to land in terms of the sector being committed. Yes, it's not the entire sector committed, but we do have a critical mass now. And this is really, in Climate Champions language, this is a tipping point where there is enough momentum to accelerate that change and activate that ambition loop. And I mean, really on that note, I do want to kind of give a big nod to Julie, who was our first UK GBC accelerator, which means she was the first one to say, I'm going to drive my entire membership behind Race to Zero. And, champions like that have really helped with that widespread advocacy. And finally, the 4th outcome, which is where I believe the rest of the discussion will center, is collaborating to drive action, solutions, and pathways to ensure there is no lag between ambition and action. 8 years left to reduce emissions by half in a sector where product takes 5 years to get off the ground, where refurbishment takes forever to plan and deliver. It's not that long. It's not that long of time frame we've got to act. So it must be done now. And so what do we need? We need a comprehensive roadmap for all the sectors to align. I'm really looking forward to a groundbreaking roadmap being launched tomorrow, which talks to each of the actors of the supply chain and policymakers, what we all need to do on that common trajectory, common goal. We need roadmaps. We need to scale solutions. The reason I say scale solutions is there are plenty of good examples in our sector, lighthouse projects, exemplar projects that exist, who've shown this can be done. Again, Build Better Now is my source for inspiration these days. It's got some great examples across the globe of what has been done at the virtual pavilion, which needs to now scaled up. And then finally, yes, I know, soon we'll talk about some of the challenges around financing, tech, risk management, behavioral change. So we do need to innovate around new solutions to navigate those challenges, absolutely. So this is where radical collaboration is crucial, only because if you do it alone, we won't do it fast enough. And that's really the core mantra behind Climate Champions on the how needs to be through collaboration, and really looking forward to kind of how the perspectives from the group on how we can do it together. So to recap, 4 outcomes: establishing our sector as a critical climate solution, one voice, one ambition with our 2030 and 2050 goal, all engaged and committed. We are at the tipping point. We need to continue to push that. And finally, we need to collaborate to drive action at pace. And just a final word on collaboration, just reflecting on the day tomorrow that we'll all experience. It is actually a brilliant day to see collaboration in action. Our day is quite unique in the sense we've got ministers, mayors, financiers, and all of us built environment businesses really unpacking what they need to do to deliver on a net zero and resilient built environment. And that's cross-sectoral collaboration. So really excited about tomorrow. And on that note, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sonal, for that clarity of thinking, ambition and passion, clearly lots of passion in what you're doing. So maybe I'll open up for a quick round of comments or questions for Sonal before we engage our speakers. I will hang on to the mic, I think, unless I pass it to the people here. So if anyone has, we have basically 5 minutes for a few comments and questions. Anyone wants to come back to Sonal? Okay. Roland?
We can't hear.
Roland was saying that Sonal should have been on TV presenting that clear thinking. Okay, well, congratulations. Maybe I have a question then, if I can take that privilege. Having laid that clarity of ambition, we are obviously going to go into the how now in that discussion. How do you, in your view, how do you encourage more agile and ambitious players to act now? And what kind of incentive you proposing to put in place to do so?
The Race to Zero campaign has got an end goal of 2050, but the campaign is very much focused on 2030 ambition. Act now to get to 50% reduction in the next 8 years. So that is a now focused narrative. So in many ways, all leading businesses who have committed to Race to Zero have to act now. I mean, and, you know, it has got a very strong focus on being credible and science-based, and, you know, businesses don't act now. I've heard Nigel and Gonzalo saying, you will be kicked out of Race to Zero. So that is an impetus. But for our sector, another key lever for leading businesses to act now is the market demand. And, you know, World Green Building Council published this report last week on Beyond the Business Case, and it had some patchy stats on level of market demand across the globe. I mean, Europe, we've been privileged, huge demand. I don't think that's the case elsewhere. And this is where, you know, this is where I think we could do more. Civil society demand from users, occupiers, and, you know, activating that demand is something would be my ask in terms of an important stakeholder that we need to get on place to create that demand lever. Beyond that, there are some strong demand signals coming through, you know, with cities committing to Race to Zero. Within that, their construction declaration is providing that demand signal. Financing, banks and investors, you know, our asset owners, they are creating that demand. And, you know, we've heard announcements around steel zero, concrete zero, and that there are strong demand levers coming. So to kind of ensure that we do not lag on action.
Thank you. So I'm now going to further inform our discussion, I'm now going to turn to our speakers. On the Zoom line, Diane and Sheila, and here with us in the room, Peter, Lars and Claire. So Claire, I'm going to turn to you first. And if you could maybe replay back of some of the highlights, insights that emerged from the discussion we have had in the past few months. What priorities, challenges, call to action were voiced by the built environment leaders across the globe? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Svi. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, we had the pleasure to host Pierre-André for the first meeting and Benoît Bazin, our CEO, for the second meeting, 2 sessions before this one to exchange on this very key domain of our value chain in the building industry. As Pierre-André rightly said, you know, the building contributes to close to 40% of the carbon emissions. So we cannot, as you said, do anything without decarbonizing the building industry, and that is a work, obviously, that we have to do together. So one of the key outcomes was that design of the building has to be tackled early on, and building needs to be designed for sustainability. And the target you set for new building in 2030 is obviously very important, and that needs to be supported by the whole value chain of our sector, which means that collaboration is key, and that's why we're very happy to have many actors obviously around this table. So it's up and down the value chain. And it is very challenging because indeed we are in a value chain which is extremely fragmented. So the challenge is huge, and that's why it's obviously difficult. So action needs to start now, and the efforts to decarbonize the built environment have inertia. Our industry is rather traditional, even though it has moved a lot and made a lot of progress in the last years, but there's a lot of inertia. Where you build a building, it's not for a couple of years. So we have to start now because of this inertia. One of the other outcomes, which I think was indeed very, very interesting and quite normal, was that digital is a great help. Digital advancement will help, and are already helping to I would say, to catalyze action and give us more agility. And it could speed up, actually, speed up the consensus and the standardization that we deeply need to have, I would say, more sustainable building practices. Which means also, and this was one of the outcomes, that we need to work, which is very key for digital when you talk about data, on common language within the building industry, common language, common standards, which is very key also for green finance, because they need to compare. We need to talk the same language at that level. It's true for regulation. It's true for carbon pricing. So agreeing on a common language is a key outcome of our discussion. I think is very important for our industry to move forward. Indeed, and not only for that, we need government action. Not only to reward companies, businesses in our sectors that already make efforts to decarbonize, to set a carbon price. As an example, Saint-Gobain has set a carbon price now to 75 euro per ton for CO2 in our capex. So each of our projects go through this carbon price. I think it's very important that we are encouraged, if I could say, as a sector, but as companies, generally speaking, by the government to have that in place. Keeping in mind, and this was also one of an interesting discussion, and the variety of the nationalities around the table is obviously very important, that not all regions actually have the same considerations or baseline, and we need to take that into account. And we may need to consider different challenges, different opportunities, different horizon, and obviously the most developed countries need to be exemplary to that respects. So obviously continue to set challenges, and as companies and as industries, and to be extremely demanding in the target will definitely help the sector to achieve decarbonation. So that was the main outcome of the two panels that we had in the last months.
Thank you very much, Claire. If I could now ask you to tell me how internally you've translated those insights in what it might mean for Saint-Gobain.
Yeah, actually, from our perspective, I gave I would say the sector perspective in terms of what were our thinking and what are the needs for us to accelerate in the decarbonation of our industry. I think from the Saint-Gobain perspective, even though we don't want to wait for the governments to act, we need government to commit, especially to provide green electricity, because obviously it will not happen if we don't have this availability. And we need them to give signals, an indication of energy limit by 2050, trend of use or price of carbon. We need their help. We are moving fast, but we cannot do it alone. The second thing, I think, from the Saint-Gobain perspective, we really need, and I echo to what I've summarized as being one of the outcome of the panel, is a common language and measurement process that will make, life cycle assessment more meaningful, more comparable. Again, Saint-Gobain has moved. We have already 1,500 EPDs, which represent more than 50% of our turnover already, which is under this domain. So I think, again, we're moving, but we need the support. And indeed, the third point I would mention from our perspective is that the banking system, the regulators, standardized reporting will be great help. Because investors, rating agencies, sustainability agencies, today they don't really share a common language. And obviously it will be extremely helpful if we had this common language for Saint-Gobain as a company to work with. So that would be my 3 takeaways of the day from the Saint-Gobain perspective.
Great. Thank you very much, Claire. And now I would like to invite 3 of our speakers to respond and build on these observations and call to action. Lars, I'll start with you from the point of view of a provider of raw material, if you can give us some reactions.
Well, firstly, I should say that what has happened in the last months is really good for Stora Enso as a renewable materials producer. So I guess there's many discussions on how to battle climate change, but very few about using timber for construction. This is one of the, I guess, least disputed topics in the industry, which has really helped us a lot. The other thing is there's been a lot of discussion about biodiversity and forest management. Do we have enough wood? Is it a biodiverse forest? And I think those discussions led to what Sonal said before. We have to act ourselves, and we have to show that we act as a company. We are the biggest sawmill in Europe. We are the 2nd largest private forest owner in Europe. So if we don't start with ourselves, then we can have meetings as much as we like. And I think this act now has really also pushed us a lot more. So firstly, what we've decided was we've put up new sustainability targets. We're also moving to a more active biodiversity management with scientific external 15 KPIs monitoring how we manage our forests. We've always been growing more than what we harvest. I mean, in Sweden and Finland, many probably don't know, but even though every year the harvesting has increased, the average forest size has doubled in the last 100 years. So there's always this fun saying we are basically losing the war against the forest up in the north. But we have to do it even better with the biodiversity in more focus. So this is something we have now put into our agenda, and we have external scientific measurement of it. Secondly, we're also investing into engineered wood capacity, because for many of the high-rise buildings, which, as you've mentioned before, this is where a lot of the growth will happen, we need cross-laminated timber, construction beam capacity. So this next year, we will open up our 4th CLT mill with an 80 million euro investment, and we will accelerate further investments, not only to look into competition, but really looking into the industry. How can we all together provide more capacity in engineered wood solutions? And for this also, we have made investments. And the second thing, and this is why I'm so happy to be here, it turned a little bit up for me that in the beginning, it was always a little bit one material versus the other, or, my industry versus your industry and everybody on his own. But I really feel that, this systemic change can only happen if we do this together. So we're investing a lot into digital tools, sharing for free, references, also concepts for school buildings, for offices, for multi-story residential building, for industrials, so that the learnings we've had how to best design in wood can be shared, or how to best have hybrid buildings with concrete and wood can best be stolen with pride from competitors, architects, developers. So building this trust, building this competence is for us an investment, also for our own sake, because the more trust, the more competence there is, there will also be more more entering this market. Because I think that one of the big challenges, at least for us as a massive wood producer, is that many still, either from regulative points of views, from financial points of views, but also just from a competence or a trust point of view, don't dare to build with wood. There is still, I always say, wood performs the same way. However, the regulations are different everywhere, right? And this costs so much energy. It's not just the financial attractiveness, but just to argue every time again about fire regulations, and again arguing that, hey, it's safe to build with wood, arguing again that, you know, wood is not a building that just lasts for 30, 50 years, right? These arguments are many times trust related, emotional. They're not only fact-based. And this is why it's so important that we spread those news. And we are not thinking about everything with wood. So we are very open-minded that there will be hybrid solutions, and, you know, that this is a step-by-step process. But if you want to make it systemic, not only us as Stora Enso, we need to act, but also we all together need to, you know, move into the same direction.
Thank you very much. Diane, can I turn to you now? And from the standpoint of design and planning, can you give us some reaction to this call to action?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sophie. It's such an honor and pleasure to be with all of you for this really important conversation. Thank you, Saint-Gobain and Pierre-André, for inviting me. And, you know, again, it is incredible to join this conversation. I'm in Edinburgh today. I'll be in Glasgow tomorrow for Buildings Day, and looking forward to conversations there as well. You know, it is really such an interesting journey. And as Sonal said, it is exciting to see a much greater focus on the built environment as an important theater of focus as it relates to decarbonization. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to speak at the UN Climate Summit in New York, and I announced Gensler's ambition to be net zero in all of our projects by 2030. And as the largest design and architecture firm, one of the largest in the world, you know, we design about 1.5 billion square feet of space, which probably equates to about $100 billion of construction specifications in terms of materials. We believe it's really important to be part of the value chain effort to influence our industry toward decarbonization. You know, as Pierre-André said, buildings contribute 40% of global carbon emissions. And with embodied carbon, that number sometimes gets to look even larger. And all of the comments that have been made about, you know, issues related to the industry. But one thing that wasn't said that I do think really is an important part of, as Sonal was talking about, the sense of urgency. You know, unlike a car that can be changed out in 5 to 10 years, our buildings are with us 30, 40, 50. I'm sitting here with buildings probably over a century old. You know, these impacts that we build today will have a long and lasting impact in our world. In fact, what we live with today was probably mostly built in the last century. And, you know, we, as we go forward, we know we can do better than that to build our future. So we believe at Gensler that there is a pathway, an important pathway to global decarbonization by focusing on the built environment. And it is, you know, again, extremely urgent as we look at rapid urbanization and development patterns that are, frankly, and I think this comment was already made, that the estimate, if we do nothing, is that, you know, this 40% is only going to grow, and by 2060, frankly, that amount will have doubled. And, you know, the points about collective action, and this is something that we feel very strongly about, that it is, you know, and again, this is part of an important theme at COP26 and why we were thrilled to be invited to be part of COP26, is that it is about all of us across this industry, from architects, designers, engineers, materials suppliers of all types, constructors, owners, and operators, as well as cities and financial institutions. all of us are needed to do our part. And that's something we feel very strongly about at Gensler, is that we also need leaders in every one of those industries to step out, maybe ahead of others in that part of the ecosystem, but also helping to drive a new standard, as it was said, increasing the ambition. From the owners and developers side of it, speaking of increasing ambition, this is an important part of this ecosystem. I sit on the board of a development company. And, again, at the end of the day, this sector, this part of our sector, raising its ambitions around net zero is critical, and raising its ambition around impactful goals. And I think we have seen it again at Gensler. We are working with developers around the world that are part of leading the way in their respective area. But again, as has been said, this is a very fractured industry, but leadership does matter. And I think what we've all seen is that as leaders, the companies that are sitting around the table today, that others key off of how decisions are made by the dominant and leadership players in each of our arenas. And as we look at the development community and how they're setting those goals, we need the investment community to reward those owners and developers as they achieve those goals with capital, access to capital, and favorable pricing. Again, this is part of how the ecosystem works, setting goals and then being rewarded for achieving those goals with more access to capital, better and more favorable pricing. From the city standpoint, and there was a lot of conversation, and absolutely we agree that our cities are an important player. And again, many cities have already, but we need more cities to establish building codes, not just because it defines how we create and design our buildings, but these building codes actually move local economies toward net zero market norms. So it becomes the norm. It becomes the expected type of building for the tenants and the occupiers in that market. Again, raising that bar. And then lastly, as designers and architects, we need to boldly change the materials and systems that we use to build our projects. And, at Gensler, we've launched our Green Materials Initiative that is going to basically establish frameworks and measures related to all the buildings and systems that we are using on our projects. We are literally speaking to heads of supplier and construction and engineering organizations around the world, because we plan to launch this initiative in mid-2022. And in essence, what it means is that if you're going to be part of from either supplying a material or a system on a Gensler building or project, it has to meet those standards. We believe that as the largest firm in our industry, that this will have the kind of ripple effect that will help to produce the kind of changes in our ecosystem that we're all looking for. So, again, I look forward to the conversation with all of you. And, again, we see this as a collaborative community and looking forward to the kind of impacts we can have together.
Thank you, Diane. Set of very strong messages and recommendations from you. And now I would like to hand over to Peter to speak from the standpoint of sustainable solution consultancy.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity here today. A lot has already been said, so it becomes increasingly more difficult to add something new to the conversation. In full disclosure, in addition to this being the CEO of Arcadis, I'm also a member of the Executive Committee of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and joined Arcadis 4.5 years ago. And prior to that, I worked for Fluor Corporation for 28 years. And I know than well what it takes to do construction. I know the pleasant sides of construction, and I also have a couple of scars still from the not so pleasant side of construction. It is a risky business. It is a very conservative business as well. And innovation therefore needs to really play a role in what we do. You might have also seen McKinsey's, I think it's biannual assessment, whereby they look at industries, to what extent industries are being disrupted by innovation. And sure enough, construction for many, many years now ranks second to last. Only hunting is in competition for us. So not necessarily the sort of competition we want to have. So, you know, innovation really needs to make its way into the industry. And you know, having been in the industry for so long, I know why the industry is conservative, because the industry comes with a lot of risk as well. So risk allocation needs to be part of it as well. The point I really wanted to make about sustainable solutions is, and it has already been made a little bit, but I'm going to expand on it. We already mentioned a couple of times that the role leadership plays is important. I'm going to go a little further. I'm going to make it more personal. I think personal leadership matters, and we're all leaders here. Alexis and I actually presented Arcadis sustainability strategy a little over 2 months ago almost. And in addition to making our renewed commitment to be net zero by 2035, we also, and this I think is an example of leadership, made some statements about choices we are making. And we basically said that we will not work for clients anymore who do not acknowledge that we have a problem. Clients who don't necessarily subscribe to the Paris Agreement, and hopefully as of next week to the Glasgow Agreement. And that has made some waves. But as a publicly traded company, I've not heard a single shareholder tell me or ask me, what the hell did you say? What did you say? I mean, this will mean something to your business. And even if I had the question, I would have known how to answer it. But it is really all about, you know, personal leadership, making choices and making the right choices. My wife and I have 3 daughters, all in their 20s, so they are the critical generation. They already asked me the critical questions. I don't want to be sitting here in a couple of years from now telling them, yeah, well, yeah, the government actually didn't have a carbon price, and there's a couple of other things which also didn't come our way, and therefore I didn't do anything and everything I need to do as a leader. So for me, it is all about personal leadership.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for bringing that dimension. And as you say, there are choices you can make to accelerate action in that way as a leader. Sheila, I wanted to come to you now. I've seen you nodding and cheering at some stage in the conversation, so I'm looking forward to your contribution, and thank you for listening to us. I would like to ask you from a Spark perspective about your vision for a net zero and resilient home, neighborhood, and city. And what would you add and challenge about the priorities and commitment and calls to action that you have heard so far from the speakers? Over to you, Sheila.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I have been carefully listening to this conversation. And except for the fact that there was one mention about lots of people who need to be housed, who live, you've basically been talking about formal construction and the materials that you use in formal construction. And that's good. And I think that needs to be done. But I think somebody mentioned that there are about 1.6 or 2 billion people living in both the North and the South in terrible habitat situations. In the North, in terribly designed housing stock that needs to be furbished, which many of the discussions in the webinars that I have been on have been very, they're not being very positive about it being done because of the subsidy structure and things like that. But in the global South and in the constituency where I work, most of the cities have 40% of their residents living in dismally crowded and dense locations, using materials that are recycled from the materials that you produce, and which provide them absolutely no capacity to deal with heat, weather that's wet, wind, fires, and floods. And they imitate, because they live in the city, the materials. So the materials move from cardboard and straw and wood, which all of you want to move to, into getting concrete and steel and asbestos and zinc roofings. And there is no organizational commitment to look at where all these people are going to be in the next 10 years, because they're not contributing to much of the carbon
Sheila,
emissions.
just hold on a second. Sorry, there's an announcement being made. So just pause for 1 second.
We are medically exempt. Thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you, Sheila. Please continue.
So my challenge to all of you, as my challenge was to the two champions, was to say, what is government and private sector going to do to not only deal with reduction of emissions, but to address the issue of social justice and equity, which is equally part of the discussion, which always gets neglected and set aside when you talk about trillions of dollars and huge amounts. The lives of poor women struggling to keep their families safe is completely destroyed. I mean, talking about resilience building, talking about safe homes is completely unavailable, inaccessible, unaffordable to all these households who, by the way, 93% of them design, construct, and finance their own homes with materials that you did not produce for them, but which they either scavenge or buy secondhand or whatever. So my challenge, first of all, to Nigel and Gonzalo, led them to ask me what I wanted to do. And my challenge to all of you is, will you join our campaign, which is called Roof Over Our Heads? How do we help poor neighborhoods and poor communities explore design, construction material that they can incrementally utilize to upgrade their homes, improve the safety of their homes and neighborhoods, while they negotiate with their municipalities and governments for land security, for basic amenities and services. So they want to work on a two-prong approach. And my organization, Shack Dwellers International, works in 33 countries and about 350 cities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We have detailed data about materials poor people use, the size of their homes, the volume of housing in those cities. We are ready to work with anybody who wants to do any exploration by which we help them leapfrog in the energy sector. We've heard about roofing materials that have solar panels. At the moment, they are so expensive that only rich people in the global south can afford them. Or grants that are made for experimentation can do that. We hear lots of little things, but manufacturing them at the scale, making them locally available, are things that we believe will not only produce huge skill building and wage earning for these constituencies, but will also improve their homes. And they will be materials that you will produce and sell. They presently utilize the cement, the steel, and all the kinds of materials that you produce, but which is dysfunctional in their lives because it's not designed and developed to serve their needs. So I'd like to know what you would like to do about that.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Sheila. This is a great set of comments and insight and challenge. And there's a lot of talk at COP about there is no climate solution without climate justice. And it's 100% relevant to this conversation. With this in mind, I just want maybe to spend 1 minute reflecting on what are the other players in the value chain that have not are not represented here, that in your view need to be part of this kind of roundtable now in the future in order to really align and the value chain that will deliver that kind of net zero commitment. I don't know, Claire, whether you have a view on that.
Yeah, I do. I want to rebound on Sheila's comment just very, very quickly, but I think they were extremely not only touching, but engaging for all of us. And I want to share that during our last executive meeting that took place in September, we at Saint-Gobain set for ourselves a challenge, which is to design, manufacture, and build a low-cost housing for people in India or in Brazil or in South Africa. And we are currently in the last 2 months having a working group that is working extremely hard with a Brazilian and an Indian executives to put in place this offer so that we answer what you truly put on the table as the most on the table in the discussion. So I wanted to tell you that this is tackled, start to be tackled, because this is very important. And I may add to your question, Sophie, I think there are people like craftsmen, artisans that are not around the table today, but that in the value chain are very, very important. So we need to put them on board. We need to train them. We need to educate them because they are obviously the last before the very last one part of the chain, and we need them to have sustainable building around the globe. And actually, we for a few years we train them. We train them on energy efficiency, and we try to elevate the knowledge and the understanding of the challenge that we are going through.
Great,
Yeah.
Diane,
So,
please.
oh, thank you. You know, I would say that to answer your question, I really believe the real estate industry is an important part of this conversation, and probably could be around the table a little bit more present and able to talk about. I mean, there were a number of things that were here that are all part of, again, how you think about developing buildings. But the point about, you know, what are the measurements? What are the agreed upon standards of performance that are going to create those kind of science-based targets that, again, the financial sector then can respond to as well. So I think we really do need to bring that group into the conversation. But I do want to underscore something I think that Peter said, which is about innovation. And this is what, when we put our 2030 challenge, our Gensler 2030 challenge out there, and this initiative that we're launching literally in 2022 about green and sustainable materials and systems, the point is not to exclude anyone. The point is to basically catalyze innovation. To say, look, we are looking to bring forward onto projects to create a market for, and that was discussed, I think, by Sonal at one point, create a market for the kinds of transformative new materials, adjusted and augmented materials, new systems that have been looking for a market. You know, you talk to leaders of, you know, a lot of the steel or concrete or glass companies or roofing companies, you know, various kinds of building systems. And there's always some kind of investment they're making in developing something, and it's off to the side. It's not their main line of business. It's not what is their bread and butter, because there's no market. There's no demand. And so what we're doing is bringing that demand forward and being very explicit, very open, very loud about it, so that we can basically incentivize companies to say, look, you know, again, the product you were bringing to market before, we're not going to be specifying. But if it can perform to this level, and if you have a product that performs to this level, we will specify it. So I think this point about innovation is really that's the driver. If you look at the tech industry, if you look at so many other industries, look at the car industry, there've been electric cars forever, but it wasn't until there was innovation, you know, not only the Tesla, but the battery that goes into the Tesla, Again, we need innovation of all the parts. And if there's a market, then we believe that that innovation will have the kind of financing that it deserves.
Great, thank you, Diane. Any other comments on who should be around the table? Yes, go ahead.
So I'm Alexis, I work with Peter, and I also come from a different industry originally, and I've seen how different industries have tackled some of these problems. So I was originally more in the B2C space. As of February, I've come into this space. I was previously in apparel and footwear, worked with Adidas, and saw how they did leverage the cross-industry collaborations and the global industry associations. And whereas we've seen some, I have seen very little of that. In this year, as I've been getting to know the organization, we're a global organization, and seeing those come together and drive very specific sets of actions. For example, how do we all jointly call for the same sort of increase in ambition in codes, in how we measure on a project basis, carbon, these things. I've seen some, but I haven't seen quite as much as I thought would be there. The second one is in IT. I also haven't seen that uniformity across IT in terms of the data systems. And the last is in innovative finance. It's not just banking putting up money, it's them being willing to go in with companies on new business models. There's been an explosion of that in the B2C space. I haven't seen it as much here. And so I would like to see more of that at the table. We have some actors, but I would like to see a lot more.
Yeah, and again, Renee from Johnson Controls. Just to build on your point quickly, prior to coming into the buildings built environment, I was in consumer packaging. And this very much reminds me of the planet or plastic. I always say the world exploded in plastic. And WBCSD organized the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And it really was such, to the collaboration, it was an amazing initiative. And this is where I remember sitting at Dow's headquarters, and they said, if we can work with these competitors, we can do anything. So it was a CEO-led, cross collaboration, but in the communication of that initiative created such a groundswell for the entire consumer packaging industry. Where it was forward thinking. It's two verticals. One was innovation. So everyone was lining up around the innovation that had to be done. And the second pillar was community investment. So you actually had to dedicate to innovation a certain amount, you guys know that, a certain amount of your company in innovating the dollars, a certain amount that each company invested into community investment. But collectively, we decided where to put the money. And it was, and I think it's still going, and now it's more of a, I haven't been part of it in a while, but now I think it's just part of how that industry works. There's such an opportunity here. Everything that everyone is saying is exactly that spot when, we were counting plastic water bottles, right? When that all kind of happened. And also the consumer acknowledgement, which I think would also help on the demand side, on the real estate side, like consumers starting to use the language like single-use plastic or, operating emission, whatever that might be. I don't know if operating emissions. So just kind of an observation, and I think maybe the opportunity here that we could discuss more tomorrow or whenever it might be.
Thank you very much for this comment. I want to come back to you afterward, but I want to launch the conversation that I really meant to have here today, which is for us to leave with a sense of what are some of the initiatives that have been, or opportunities that have been put on the table, whether at company level, at city level, or at value chain level, that you'd like to add your voice to, or what are this kind of opportunities that you think we should be adding that hasn't yet been discussed. And at a city level, do you want to speak for a particular alignment opportunity, and same at a value chain level? This is the discussion that I want us to have collectively now. And the idea for us collectively, other than the fact we clearly need a bigger table next time we all meet, is to really leave with some sense of potential for collective action, alignment on some of those existing and new initiatives. So I'll hand over to you, but I just wanted to set that up.
Thank you very much. We do have a whole high performance buildings initiative ongoing. I won't describe it today because we haven't got time. Scott Foster, I'm Director of Sustainable Energy with the UN in Geneva. And we have a high performance buildings initiative building on some guidelines that we've developed, but it goes way beyond energy efficiency. It goes way beyond carbon efficiency. It gets into the spectrum of outcomes that we should expect from the built environment, including affordability, energy poverty, resilience, health, social justice, and the rest of it. The other communities, because I am trying to answer your question, that we have found interesting, it's not just the people involved in the envelope, it's the systems people, it's the IT people, it's the transport people, it's the water people, it's the waste people, because those are all of the services that the built environment offers to occupants. And it's not just residential, it's commercial and industrial. So I think if you think broadly across the built environment and what it can deliver, you'd need to engage those communities. Thank you.
I'll remind you again, Ingrid Reumer, the Vice President, External, nothing? I'll speak up for you. Okay. Ingrid Reumer, I'll just remind you again, Vice President, Sustainability and External Relations from Velux. But just first one reflection you mentioned around the skills topic, and especially the builders that we have both on site, but also in people's homes. So we've discussed for years, I think, their ability to install the equipment the right way, but I think their advisory role will be increasingly important, but also their responsibility in relation to circular economy. What they will have afterwards, how to dismantle, etc. So their understanding of that, I think, will be crucial. But then maybe to make it short, because there's other speakers, I would maybe come with an example from my home country, Denmark, where we across the entire building sector have come together in what we call a climate partnership asked by the Danish government. So we've had 100 representatives of every single part of the value chain coming with a collective roadmap for the entire building industry in the country, how we want to move forward together. In total, 63 detailed recommendations, both what we can do as a sector, but also the ask for the government. So it's so that it becomes this two-way street, both taking our own medicine that we have to start working with CO2 calculations, LCA, electrical vehicles, etc., but also what do we need from the government in terms of green electricity all the way to the building site, etc., etc., etc. So I think if one has that collaborative mindset, I think was also mentioned over here, and we can see across the entire value chain, I think we can really bring some value to it. And then finally, when we add also to your point, I think we will have to build on top of or next to carbon, biodiversity understanding, and really rise to that challenge. And also, of course, the social aspects with health, energy poverty, as was mentioned, etc. So I think we need to see the wider agenda. Thank you.
Question, do you want to add your voice to the opportunity for alignment at the company?
We don't hear.
Or do you want to add something new? Anyone? Sorry, I missed someone wanted to speak. Christina, and then we go to Nigel and then to Roland.
Thank you. Oh, what a clash. I would say we have here, it's great to hear your company initiatives, right? But I guess in the spirit of what Sanal also shared in the beginning, we have come to a collaboration moment where we now have some points of true alignment on how to scale this up, right? And we have the race to zero. We have the seriousness of science-based targets. We have the seriousness of the World GBC's net zero carbon buildings commitment. Yes, talking whole life carbon. And of course, there are other initiatives that bring value. And what we're doing really, I think the difference in this COP is that we're coming together, one voice, one ambition. So it would be great that we take this further in terms of a wider coalition of conversations to scale up what you individually do so great. We heard you're doing great. And take this to the scale that Sheila is demanding from us, right? Developing countries still urbanizing at a high rate. That means land use in biodiversity hotspots. There's a great study from MIT about that, goes about the biodiversity crisis. Urban biodiversity, the prairie centers outside, that is going to be huge. The resources, where are they going to come from? Circular economy, you got solutions. I guess it's the moment of true sharing and opening the books, getting others up to speed. And as you say, radical transparency around products and no more specification of products that are not right. And let's stop the nonsense of building bad assets. Systemic efficiency in terms of infrastructure and scaling up that in a rate and speed that this sector hasn't seen. And let's give McKinsey a surprise, right? Because productivity in this industry has not changed in 50 years. And that is really, really outstanding in an industry that has a huge demand and has a huge role to play from all respects. And of course, the social responsibility to bring everyone along. And as we go into COP27, Africa will demand we speak resiliency. There's much more to net there. And so we have to have that true conversation to bring those solutions, help them not become carbon intensive, and bring the social value part of doing great built environment assets out there. So I want to share that, so kind of a scratch from hearing you all, and that because it is about coming together in one voice, one ambition, right? And cutting the silos even from our companies and our own NGOs and our fundraising. There's no time for that. There's really no time for that.
Well, yeah, thanks, Christina. I think I really wanted to say something along the similar lines. I mean, you know, Arup, for over a year now, we've been in the race to zero. We've made science-based target commitments as you have. We've committed to net zero carbon buildings. What we're finding is that the acting on the granularity of that is something we can't act on our own. And so it's actually more than collective action. It's more than all of us doing a bit. What we're discovering is that we're actually having to change some of the relationships we have with our supply chain. We're having to collaborate differently with our landlords, for example, just to take it as a very close prosaic, you know, problem for us as an organization. It's a very different relationship, looking to the real estate market to work with us, to supply us things that will help us meet our target in 2030 or our target in 2025 to reduce carbon first. So, you know, the reduction up front is the really important part. You know, designing for net zero is not something that we can say is going to halve emissions by 2030. We know that because, you know, offsetting emissions is not achieving that halving of emissions. So, you know, producing granularity of data is something that we feel is really important. So your point to actually measuring whole life carbon is something that we're committed to now, to be able to share that, to make decisions. And things like a whole life carbon roadmap, which we're going to be launching with the UK GBC tomorrow, which is really, really exciting. That gives us that trajectory. But we need to know, you know, sectorally, what projects what projects in the built environment will take to meet those carbon commitments. You know, you don't start a construction without knowing what it's going to cost. You shouldn't start a construction without knowing what the carbon is, and having, you know, working collaboratively together, which I think is changing business as usual. So for us, you know, our work with the UK GBC or with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, for example, on circular economy is really important, because I don't think manufacturers alone can rise to the challenge. They have R&D going on in the background, but as Zion said, it's, you know, there's not the demand there. But we need to work, rather than sort of only be requiring of manufacturers, we have to work with them to create the demand value chain. So, you know, designers, investors, developers will see up front the opportunity for facade replacement, and actually then leaning into the facade industry to try to produce the kind of market that can take that material and upcycle it, so that we're not just taking new resources is a way of working with and co-creating with, say, manufacturers and investors. So I think that's, for me, it's what does this deep collaboration really mean? And I think it's actually working with each other openly, as you say, to change the business practices that we have now to a completely transformed new set of business practices.
Thank you, Roland, with the WBCSD. You said half of what I was going to say, but which is great. I'd like to just reflect on where we are here at the moment, but then also pick up on the challenge that Sheila has put in front of us and Christina has also echoed. First of all, I do think we're kind of at a milestone with this COP. Sonal, your speech should have been recorded. I hope it was, because we bring really this common language, this common vision when it comes to the decarbonization of this sector. And Emmanuel, you remember maybe 4 years ago, we were saying we need this common language, and I think we're getting there. We have the Global Alliance for Buildings, we have the Built Environment Coalition, and thank you to the climate champions team, exactly, for having helped us. Now, we should not lower our arms. We need to continue that. We see tomorrow ministers, mayors, and CEOs speak about this. So we need to continue that. But I think this same momentum we need to use to bring in the other challenges that we have to work on. And I think I'd like to challenge ourselves at the WBCSD, and I know many of our members, you are here, and I'm speaking under the watch of our EXCO member, Peter, but we're talking about this triple challenge of climate, nature, and inequality. And so we really need to start looking at that as well, much more. We're starting to work on what does it mean nature positive for the built environment? So what will this mean in city development, in built environment, but also the inequality? So these are the three key imperatives. And I think we should use this momentum we have created. We now know how to collaborate. We now know how to get together. And I think what Saint-Gobain is doing is great. You're starting this within your own limits, but you will hopefully then also collaborate. How can we really address that challenge? So I think this is an excellent way to continue the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody have said a lot of things. I just add on the Asian perspective. And there are three areas, definitely everyone is working on it. The decarbonization, covering both new build and retrofitting, which is very important. And then the second one is digitalization, innovation, which is talking about adaptation, not just about mitigation, which is very important. Last but not least is disclosure. And we just finished the UNGC private sector meeting today. We keep talking about just transition and governance. I mean, a lot of company may be like declaring, pledging for net zero, but what's the definition? What's the scope? And how transparent you are in disclosing data has to be very tangible and quantifiable. So these are the challenges that we are facing because the people here are all converse. But when we go back to Asian, when we talk to my cement supplier, they will still like, okay, let me learn how to, what do you really mean by sustainable cement and concrete and sustainable steel? They are still chasing after, the leaders. So this is the biggest challenge. Then the other one is as a landlord, and we also have a footprint of 150 hotels worldwide. So facility and building management is an area that is really, really a big challenge. When we talk about life cycle, new building with new technology, starting from drawing board, is not as challenging to be net zero. But when you talk about older buildings, that will be the biggest challenge. And I think, as an asset owner with, presence in so many countries, is really a very difficult task for us. But well, there are technology, but how do we apply it? That is something that is the biggest challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Ru. Thank you. Pierre-André, I'd love to ask you to reiterate the way forward as you see it for Saint-Gobain and your plan to build the collaboration needed to scale action for the net zero built environments.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank all the participants because I think there were plenty of very good ideas. Where are we today? And you know, if I try to compare where we were a few years ago, I would start by some bad news. Is that there are some topics that we have not worked on efficiently enough. I just will take one, which is Sheila's point, which was very important. Claire mentioned that Saint-Gobain is taking some new initiatives, but we have had initiatives for 10 years on that, built on innovation, Diane, but it's very difficult. And honestly, so maybe Sheila, we can put you in touch, because we do that in our R&D center in India. But on this topic, we have not been so successful. I'd like to take on the other hand, there are issues where we have made a lot of progress. And like, you know, WBC, as we said, on the Green Building Council, which has been very influential. I just want to take one example, which is the fact that this net zero that a lot of companies are working on, and they have their own commitments with SBTs and all that. And I just want to take one example, and not entering too much into details, but we are making commitment on what we call scope 1, 2, and 3, you know, which is a different level at which you can improve your footprint. And what I discovered, which is at the heart of what we see today, is that the scope 3 of one piece, one company like us, is a scope 1 or 2 of one other company. So as we are making commitment more and more individually, I am quite optimistic that we are going to be forced to work more on what the others are doing. That's for me a piece of optimism. And I think that the really thing is to scale up, to continue to exchange best practices, because you know, we are a manufacturer. In industry, we like to measure, and we are relatively good at measuring, and scale is important. In the built environment, scale is very difficult. Many participants have said that. And it's even more difficult in what is a renovation, because then we are not going to build everything from scratch now. So we need, if you want to improve the building that is behind you from the last century, it's a renovation. In many parts of the world, that's what we need to do. And that's going to be more difficult to scale up. But I think we start to have more tools. We need to have more life cycle analysis, the language we said, but I think we have made quite significant progress. I think the Green Building Council are really very key on that. And I hope tomorrow is going to be an important day where we can, you know, continue to work together. I think we need, you know, we are going to be forced to work together. There are plenty of people who want to do it, but I think in addition, we are going to be forced if we want to be good at what we have committed one by one. That's my message. So I think we should continue, and Saint-Gobain is, you know, is extremely willing to do that. First, if we want to have our own commitment, we need to work with most of the people who are in the room. We are very happy to continue to take various initiatives. There are various forums that have been quoted. So I think we you know, whether we like it or not, and I think we say we like it, I think we are going to work more collectively, which is good news.
Thank you, Pierre-André. And I think we like it. That's the feel I'm getting from this conversation today. So with 1 minute to spare, I'm not going to attempt to summarize the conversation. I just would like to make sure that someone that might not have contributed would like to make a contribution before we close.
I'm Diego from the municipality of Vitacura. I just want to add something to this table. It's probably all this initiative, we don't have too much to say because you have to be in practice, but what have to be considered is what is going to happen with all this initiative after the construction is done. As I'm saying, like a green roof or a compensation plan, because if nobody take care of it, start to be a municipality problem. So just I want to add that we need to consider what is happening during construction, but also after construction.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I asked. So I'm just going to close and thank you all for your participation and insights. I would like to thank Saint-Gobain for hosting such a rich conversation and for your commitment to continue it, most importantly. And we will follow up with notes and a summary of this conversation so that we can build on that in the future. And in the interim, Sonal, I just would like to wish you good luck for tomorrow. And thank you again for your wonderful scene set at the beginning. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.